Hey everybody, Professor Moore here, and today I want to talk about three extremely relevant and timely films that depict what it would be like if Britain or the US were ever hit with a nuclear weapon. The first film is The War Game from 1966. This film was produced by the BBC and was originally intended to air on television. However, after a screening of the film in 1965, the company decided that the movie was too horrifying and decided not to air it. The movie was released in theaters the following year and won an Academy Award in 1967. What makes the film so effective is that it's presented as a documentary, and there are times that you forget that what you're watching is fiction. The film starts with a nuclear war breaking out between the Soviet Union and the United States over the crisis between East and West Germany, and follows the fallout from a nuclear bomb being dropped on Britain. It's no wonder why the BBC worried that this film would be too traumatizing on the public. In one scene, police officers are given the job of ending the lives of people suffering from radiation sickness with no hope of survival. In another scene, we see civil servants gathering thousands of corpses to be burned. The film ends on Christmas Day after the bombing, with the cameraman asking wounded children what they want to be when they grow up. They all answer, "I don't want to be nothing." The credits roll as we hear a record player playing an eerie rendition of Silent Night, not too uplifting and cheerful. In 1983, ABC premiered the film The Day After, which depicts the impact of several nuclear bombs being dropped on Kansas during a conflict between the Soviet Union and the US over the situation in occupied Germany. This TV movie was a cultural phenomenon. Not only was it viewed by over 100 million Americans, but it terrified US President Ronald Reagan so much that he renewed his efforts to work with the Soviet Union to limit the threat of nuclear war. The movie features terrifying scenes of nuclear bombs falling on American cities. And some of the most chilling footage is people being vaporized and turned into skeletons. Even today, these scenes have the ability to shock, sicken, and scare its viewers. The same year that this film was released, astronomer Carl Sagan wrote an article that introduced the world to the concept of nuclear winter. He described how a nuclear war would lead to a fallout where smoke and dust would block out the sun and plunge the world into a freezing hellscape. Virtually all crops and farm animals would be destroyed, and most of the human survivors would starve. In his 1925 poem, The Hollow Men, T.S. Eliot famously said, "This is how the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper." But the two endings are not mutually exclusive. In a nuclear war, the world will end for many with a bang, but for those left behind to deal with radiation sickness and nuclear winter, it will end with a whimper. In 1984, the BBC released what is without a doubt the most horrifying and disturbing film on nuclear war ever produced, Threads. This is honestly the bleakest movie I've ever seen, and has the power to send almost anyone into a spiral of existential dread or crippling depression. If you think the ending of the movie The Mist is depressing, it has nothing on Threads. Like The War Game, Threads presents itself as a documentary, and it's this focus on hyper-realism that makes the film so upsetting and unforgettable. Like The War Game and The Day After, Threads depicts a nuclear war breaking out between the Soviet Union and the US. But unlike these other films, the war doesn't start over the situation in Germany. It begins in the Middle East with an invasion of Iran. So many elements of Threads makes this film seem prophetic and a reflection of our world today. For example, there's a powerful scene of an anti-nuclear demonstration with protesters chanting, "Jobs, not bombs." This is just as easily a chant that could be heard by American protesters today. At a time when many Americans can't even afford the basic necessities, our government continues to send bombs to Ukraine and Israel to rain down death all over the world. What makes Threads different from its American counterpart The Day After is that there is absolutely no sense of hope or redemption. Threads shows life after a nuclear war as an ugly and painful descent into death and depravity. Many of the images in Threads will remain seared in your brain long after you finish watching this film. However, one of the most terrifying parts of this movie is how it opens. We see British people carrying on with their lives and focusing on their daily concerns, all while ignoring news reports in the background of impending doom. Two relevant scenes depict British youth consumed by technology and oblivious to the threat of war. One scene shows a girl at a store listening to her Walkman and reading a magazine about pop culture, while right in front of her is a newspaper about the threat of war. Another scene shows a child sitting in front of a TV screen warning about the war that's coming, but he isn't paying attention because he's absorbed in a video game. These scenes could come right out of our world today. Just switch the Walkman for AirPods and the video game with our phones and social media. In fact, I often feel like I'm living in the opening scene of Threads when I see headlines like this: Norway providing the public with pamphlets on how to survive war. Or, Germany draws up list of bunkers as tensions with Russia rise. Most of us see headlines like this and we just keep scrolling. We haven't learned to stop worrying and love the bomb. We've learned to completely block it out of our minds and pretend like it doesn't exist. Even though all of these films were released decades ago, they are just as relevant today as they were then. The threat of nuclear war has not gone away, we've just got better at ignoring it. We've convinced ourselves that the threat of nuclear war died with the Cold War. Unfortunately, these films depicting what life would be like after a nuclear war will always be relevant as long as there is a single nuclear weapon left in the world.